Thus far, most of what we've heard about to address the budget gap has been about raising more revenue. But Fulop thinks it's not fundamentally a question of how much the city is taking in.
I think at the core of the problem is that you have a spending problem and less of a revenue problem. And that's what we try to kind of hammer home repeatedly.
Where did New York City go in the wrong direction with their budget? There was a time not too long ago that they had balanced budgets.
Yeah.
They were doing okay. Is it because the spending just grew too much, or did the growth of the overall economy slow down?
I mean, look, it's complicated because you have a lot of things simultaneously happening. So you had costs, COVID, go through the roof. You have tariffs. You have wages and union contracts that have increased fairly significantly. You've had very progressive mayors that have layered on additional social service. So all those things kind of come together, but a pragmatic person would look at it and say, the city budget has grown significantly faster than the rate of inflation, and that is a question mark on why. But putting that aside for a second, what we've tried to say is we should be thoughtful about the program overall and whether it achieves the outcome that you want to achieve.
If the pied-à-terre tax goes forward, and if it's $500 million, that's still way short of where we need to be. Right. I mean, the estimates are over $5 billion. Right. So if you'd won, if you got to be mayor, where would you look for the other $4.5+ billion?
I found it very difficult, and I tried to really get down into the weeds. I mean, you can see $5 million to build a public restroom in a park is 10 times too much. We pay 6 times as much as any city in the world to construct 1 mile of subway. So you can see those examples. Just the school budget's 37% of our $118 billion budget. I have been very involved in charter schools and education reform over the years, and I know there's a lot of fat in there, you know, dead people on the payroll and that kind of thing. So I think I might start with just sort of a 1 or 2% across the board cut, and that sort of gets you in a $118 billion budget, that gets you a bunch of the way there, and then negotiate from there.
Balancing the books on a New York City budget is never easy. And it's not surprising that there's a range of ideas about how to come up with a few $1 billion to make it work, with or without calling out specific CEOs and their penthouse apartments. But the one thing most everyone agrees on is that we need to get the balance right to ensure that New York City remains a magnet for talented young workers and the companies that employ them.
The best asset here, which is very hard to replicate, okay, is New York City brand is very, very special. And 2, it is the most desirable place for young people to want to be, okay? That is a very, very special thing. Now, you have AI, that uncertainty around jobs, and the affordability on housing. So those are 2 things that go directly at that young person who wants to live here. So that is a challenge. And then you also have places like, use Texas as an example. So JP Morgan today has more jobs in Texas than they do in New York. It's a crazy thing to think about. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. So the trend is moving in a bad direction. Goldman Sachs trend in the bad direction. Why? It's bigger than taxes. Texas has been very deliberate with their strategy on how they're going to attract jobs. So they changed their court systems entirely to replicate Delaware, to make it more corporate friendly. They're starting a Texas stock exchange to have better access to the capital markets. Then they have incentives, and they have leadership that talks about embracing their big corporate communities.
You need to build a lot more housing, not just low-income or affordable housing, but it all trickles through. We need to build more housing for, you know, young professionals who can afford to pay more. You know, look, when Amazon came and wanted to put their headquarters here, you know, you want a mayor who invites Jeff Bezos and the Amazon executives to Gracie Mansion, sits down with all the key people from the city, and you know, rolls out the welcome mat. So some of it's just sort of messaging and signaling and being a champion for business in the city.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.